The US is ramping up the pressure on Syria, with the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton vowing Bashar Al-Assad's government will be held accountable for the violence. This comes on top of economic sanctions from the European Union. Many say the situation is mirroring now the build-up to the military intervention in Libya. RT's Gani Chichikan, as Morsh joins us live from Washington, D.C. Gani, very good evening to you. So more pressure, as I mentioned, from the US today. Put some flesh on the bones. What more have we heard?
Well, Kevin, the U.S. Secretary of State called the Syrian government's reprisals brutal and said they were responsible for hundreds of deaths. Hillary Clinton also said the U.S. is looking to raise international pressure on the Syrian government, although she stopped short of saying that Bashar Assad has lost his legitimacy as a leader. But a White House source said the Obama administration is edging actually closer to declaring Assad's rule in Syria illegitimate. Now, the source said it will be the first step. What will be the second step, or where those steps are leading, is unclear now. The European Union has already made some moves. It imposed a package of sanctions on Syria, which include asset freezes and travel bans for certain individuals, but stopped short of adding the Syrian president to their blacklist. From what we're getting here in Washington, the U.S. could be adding Assad to their blacklist at any time and start calling for the Syrian leader to step down. It usually starts with sanctions. So as we've seen in Libya, also from the case of Libya, we remember that the road from sanctions to active military intervention can be very short and very prompt. The possibility of adding a new front to America's wars does not appeal to most Americans. We know that the majority of Americans oppose intervention in Libya, although the U.S. involvement is diplomatically covered up by the larger role of NATO there. But many understand here that the U.S. is the biggest contributor in NATO, and therefore they are no less involved. Also, listening to what people say here about the possibility of getting involved in Syria, many find it outrageous that the president that they elected to pull them out of all these inconclusive wars could take on another one.
Gani, a lot of talk that this is looking like how the situation unfolded before the invasion of Libya, yeah?
Well, Kevin, one thing Libya and Syria have in common, both regimes cracked down on the protesters. In Syria, we're getting reports that government tanks are shelling protesters in the country's third biggest city. That's about it. One of the big differences, though, is Colonel Gaddafi didn't have many friends in the region. With Syria, it's much more complex. Syria is Iran's closest ally in the region. Some say it's very unlikely that Iran is going to just stand by and watch regime change attempts in the neighboring Syria. This could trigger a major conflict, worse than in Libya. In Libya, coalition forces now are dealing with a stalemate. There is little progress, little sign of progress for either side in the conflict. The aerial bombardment of Libya has reached a dead end. Now they're talking about a mandate for ground troops to be sent into Libya. In the meantime, the number of civilian casualties there is growing. So from a humanitarian point of view, it's been a disaster. And many analysts say, again, from a humanitarian point of view, nothing suggests that Syria could be in a better situation with a Libya-style intervention.
Gani Chichikan in Washington, D.C., thank you for your input on the programme tonight.